Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Thanks so much for being here with us. We're awful glad that you take the time because we love doing this. And this hour and next hour, open forum. It's the internet open forum. All of our questions have come from the internet. And Jimmy Akin is our guest. Jimmy, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, the author of A Daily Defense, 365 Days Plus One to Becoming a Better Apologist. And the Bible is a Catholic book and a whole bunch of other things. And also the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Hello, Jimmy Akin.
Hello, Cyril Kellett.
Not tomorrow, but Friday, a new episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World will drop. What will it be this week?
Well, last Friday, we took a look at modern reincarnation research. There are researchers who investigate cases where typically a child reports memories of a past life, and they look at these and they investigate and see, well, are these supposed memories accurate or not? And then the question is, how do you explain these cases? And so this Friday, we're going to be looking at theories that could explain what are called cases of the reincarnation type. And we're going to be looking at a whole range of theories, and I'm going to be proposing a new theory that I have not seen in the literature on this, but that I think explains the data very well and easier than other theories explain it. And this theory does not actually involve reincarnation.
Ah, all right. Looking forward to that. You know, I was wondering as you're talking, they have that thing called Munchausen by proxy?
Oh, yeah.
Is there such a thing as if a child is there ever a parent who is a disturbed parent, in other words, who has, have we had any evidence of that?
You mean in a case of the reincarnation type?
Yeah, where the child claims reincarnation, but really it's the parent who's coaching the child or that kind of thing. Yeah.
This is one of the things that reincarnation researchers watch out for. There have also been cases, not just, so we should explain, since you used a fancy term, we should explain what Munchausen by proxy is. Munchausen syndrome, the name is based on the fictional character Baron von Munchausen, who was known for telling extravagant tales. And the syndrome that corresponds to this, Munchausen syndrome, is where a person seeks medical treatment and they seem to just be telling a tall tale. You know, maybe they're a hypochondriac or they want attention or something like that, but they are not really sick, but they're presenting to the doctor as if they're sick for some reason. And Munchausen by proxy is when someone, typically a parent, presents someone else, typically a child, for treatment and says, my child is sick and I need you to treat my child. And really the child is not sick, but the parent is making it out as if the child is sick, such as to get money from insurance or to get attention or things like that. And the problem is really with the parent, not the child. So analogously, what you're proposing is, could parents who say believe in reincarnation and want to believe that their child is someone very special, could a parent coach a child into reporting past life things, even though the child has no native inclination to do so? And the answer is yes. And reincarnation researchers are alert to that fact, and they look for it. They also look for fraud, because there are cases of fraud in reincarnation research. One of the things they try to do is get involved as early as possible. Once a child starts reporting apparent memories of a past life, so that they can investigate it before a prior person has even been identified. Because that's one of the things they try to do, is they say, okay, this child claimed he lived in a neighboring village and he had this wife and he had this kid, so let's go to the neighboring village and see if anyone lives there that recently died that had this wife with this name and these children and so forth. And if parapsychologists, reincarnation researchers, are able to get involved that early, this is known as an early bird case, because they have been able to intervene before the current family has had any contact with the prior family, and therefore they can't have adjusted their claims based on what they discovered by meeting the prior family.
Oh, yeah,
And
right.
and so early bird cases are regarded as stronger than cases where there's already been contact between the family of the current child and the prior person. So that's how they look at the data. They try to be very careful about it, but there's still the huge question of how do you explain it? Is something, I mean, if the child has knowledge that goes beyond random chance of what you could just guess, then it would seem that there's something passing between the child and the prior person. But what is it? Is it a soul? In which case reincarnation would be true. Is it some kind of residue that's not a soul? Is it simply information that's passing between the child and the prior person, say psychically? What's going on here? And so that's what we're going to talk about this week.
All right. You can check out Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, mysterious.fm, or just type in Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. You'll get there. We got a whole bunch of questions from the internet. We'll start with Jason, who asks this. What do you make of the statement in 1 Maccabees, chapter 12, verse 21, and its accuracy? Could the Greek demonym, Danans, be for members of the tribe of Dan, so that some Greeks were once Jews?
Okay, so we got two questions here. The first one is, what's the factual accuracy of 1 Maccabees 12:21? And so we need to read that. 1 Maccabees 12 contains a discussion of some correspondence between the Jewish people and the Spartans, who you may know were great warriors. And at this time in Israel's history, about 150 years before the time of Jesus, the Jewish people were in need of military allies. And so they had an alliance with the Romans. They also had an alliance with the Spartans. And they carried on this diplomacy with their allies, in part by personal visits, but also by letters that they would send between them. And so in 1 Maccabees 12, we're at a particular phase in that correspondence, and it's harking back to a letter that the king of the Spartans, a guy named Arius, had sent to the Jewish high priest Onias about 150 years earlier. And 1 Maccabees 12, starting with verse 19, says, "This is a copy of the letter which they," meaning the Spartans, "sent to Onias. Arius, king of the Spartans, to Onias the high priest, greeting. It has been found in writing concerning the Spartans and the Jews that they are brethren and are part of the family of Abraham. And now that we have learned this, please write us concerning your welfare." So you got the king of the Spartans writing the Jewish high priest saying, we discovered some writings that say we're related, that we're both descended from Abraham, and so tell us how it's going. Well, so it's certainly possible that King Arius discovered some writings that said this. That doesn't make it true. In fact, we have pretty good evidence that Jews and Spartans, who are Greeks, are not both descended from Abraham. But it's certainly possible that Arius could have discovered some writings that said that, and he was under the impression that they were related, and therefore he wrote on that basis. On the other hand, there is another possibility, which is Arius is simply, he's being diplomatic. He's buttering them up. You know, he's not really being serious that we're literally related. And this is a kind of friendship greeting. So he's speaking as if we're related. And we do similar things today. You know, I was in a truck stop the other day, and the guy behind the counter kept referring to me as brother.
Oh,
even though I'm not literally his brother. And so, you know, we have fictive or fictional family relations that we use as part of social discourse and being polite and things like that. Sometimes you'll hear people say, "Hey, cousin," even though they're not cousins, or "Hey, brother," even though they're not brothers. And so that's another possibility. about what's going on here. And of the scholars that I've seen commenting on this passage, nobody takes this really literally. In fact, I've even looked at old Catholic commentaries from a couple hundred years ago, and they all point out like this is not serious. So it could be that it's historically accurate in the sense that this is what Arius sent to Onias, and it could be historically accurate in the sense that Arius believed they were related based on documents he had read, but it's pretty universally agreed they're not really biologically part of the family of Abraham. The second question that Jason asked was about a group called the Danans. He used the word demonym, which is a demos is a people. It's where we get the word democracy. It's rule of the people. And so a demonym is a people name, the name of a people. So like American is one of your and my demonyms. Mm-hmm. Well, in some Greek literature, the Greeks are referred to as Danans. And so Jason is asking, could that mean that they were members of the tribe of Dan, which was one of the 12 Jewish tribes? And so some Greeks were once Jews. So the idea presumably would be that, after one of the exiles, like the exile of the northern kingdom to the Assyrian, when they were conquered by the Assyrians, some of the Danites migrated to the Greek peninsulas or Greek islands and became known as the Danans. And so they assimilated Greek culture, and some of the Greeks originally were Jews. Well, we don't have any indication that Danites migrated out of Israel to become Greeks. They did get exiled from their land, and we're told where they went. We're told where the 10 lost tribes of Israel went, and it wasn't to Greece. It was to parts of Iraq and Iran. So that's where you'd look if you want to find Danites. Also, there's another problem, which is that the demonym Danan is used as early in Greek literature as the Iliad, and which is the story of the part of the story of the Trojan War. And the Iliad was written by classically attributed to Homer, was written in the 700s BC. And that is too early for any Danites to have migrated to Greece and established a demonym like Danan that would have been popular enough to use in a major work like the Iliad. So the chronology doesn't work out. So it would appear that the name for Greeks, Danan, or Danan, or Danai, however you want to bring it into English, is unrelated to the tribe of Dan.
Jason, what a great question to start us off with. Thank you very, very much. We'll take our first break. Be right back with more Internet Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
Do you have a question but prefer to ask it privately? Catholic Questions can help. Go to CatholicQuestions.com to ask your question online, email us, drop us a letter, or give us a call. Longtime Catholic Answers Live apologist and author Jim Blackburn or another Catholic Questions apologist will be happy to assist you. Catholic Questions proudly supports Catholic Answers Live, so visit us at CatholicQuestions.com today. That's CatholicQuestions.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
One of the reasons we should go to Mass is because it is the food of the saints that we receive. And for the saints, they understood rightly that the time after Holy Communion, that those moments are the most precious moments of our lives.
The Holy Sacrifice of the Mass, live from the EWTN Chapel, every morning, 8 Eastern, on EWTN Radio and Television.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. It's an open forum, an internet open forum, and Jimmy Akin is here with us both hours today. And here's a question from Michael. Michael says, I understand a common answer on Catholic Answers is that the era of, quote, public revelation ended with the death of the Apostle John. Any further revelation is considered, quote, private and not binding to the faithful. My question is, why? Wouldn't the era of public revelation have ended with the ascension of Christ? If not, and original apostles could add to public revelation, then why not their disciples and the disciples of their disciples, etc.?
Okay, so first of all, you will hear this on Catholic Answers, but it's not just Catholic Answers. This is not just an opinion of apologists who happen to work at Catholic Answers. This is actually church teaching. And so you'll find this in a variety of church documents, including, for example, I've seen it in works, as recently as those by Benedict XVI. So this is a standard view. You'll also find this in the Catechism. Now, it doesn't, I don't think in the Catechism mention the death of, also I should say, you will hear some people say the death of the Apostle John. That's not church teaching. There is a common view that the Apostle John was the last of the apostles to die. And therefore, it would have been at his death. But there are problems with that. The first one is it's not certain that John the Apostle was the last apostle to die. In fact, there is a tradition that you'll find in in some early church writings that he died early and was martyred, which is another thing that you often hear, that he was the only one who wasn't martyred. But that's not certain either. There is an early tradition that says he was, as well as an early tradition that says he wasn't. So we don't know how the Apostle John died or when. And we also don't know that he was so therefore we don't know that he was the last one to die. Then there are, you don't want to assume that the apostles are limited to the 12 apostles, because there were other apostles that were fully apostles that weren't part of the 12, like St. Paul and St. Barnabas, who is referred to in the New Testament as an apostle. And then there are other people who are kind of on the fringe of being apostles. There are some passages that make it sound like they might be apostles, but it's not certain. And this would include people like Paul's traveling companions, Silas and Timothy. Because at some points, Paul will say things like, we apostles, and he seems to be meaning me, Silas, and Timothy. Mm-hmm. And so they're, Timothy's younger than Paul, so he could have lived into the 2nd century. So it's not really clear where the boundary with the apostolic age is. What church teaching has been is that Revelation ended with the death of the last apostle, or with the passing of the apostles, whoever that was. Now, in terms of the question, would the era of public revelation have ended with the ascension of Christ? Well, it could have, if God had chosen that. But in John's gospel, Jesus predicts that there's more revelation coming after his time. He says, after I'm gone, the Holy Spirit is going to take stuff that he's heard from me and the Father, and he's going to give it to you. And so he predicts that there's going to be further revelation coming after his time that sounds like it's going to be authoritative. Mm-hmm. And so that would make it public revelation. So since the age of public revelation extended beyond the time of Jesus, and another good reason to say that it did is, well, then the New Testament wouldn't count as revelation, because none of the New Testament was written before the ascension of Christ. So if the New Testament is the inspired word of God that reveals his will to us, well, then the New Testament is part of public revelation. So could it then have continued into the post-apostolic age? And the answer is yes. Yes, it could have, if God chose. He could have continued to give further revelation that is just as authoritative as what he had given previously. But the church has discerned that he chose not to do that, that there was a closure that coincided with the end of the apostolic age. And consequently, even though God does continue to give private revelation today, it doesn't have the same authority as public revelation does, and it does not add new doctrines to the faith. And that's something you will find, for example, in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. It says that Christian faith cannot accept new revelations that would claim to surpass or correct or supplement the revelation that we have from Christ and the apostles.
Michael, thank you very, very much. What a great question. This next one comes from Patrick. It's an internet open forum today, and Patrick writes, I have several follow-up questions to Michael's question. In Lamentabili Sane, Pope Pius X condemned the following proposition. Number 21. Revelation constituting the object of the Catholic faith was not complete with the apostles. Was there any magisterial precedence for this condemnation? Do you want go ahead?
Yeah, let me do that part.
Okay.
So notice what it says, revelation constituting the object of Catholic faith. So this would be things all Catholics are expected to believe. It's not private revelation. He says that he's condemning or rejecting the proposition that wasn't complete with the apostles. And was there any magisterial precedent for this? Well, I haven't looked it up, but I'm sure there was. Certainly, it was the common theological opinion for going all the way back to the 2nd century that this was the case, and I'm pretty sure that this got elevated from theological opinion to church teaching prior to the time of Pius X, but I'd have to do some research to verify that.
Okay, and then he asks, after the publication of Lamentabili Sane, many theologians restated the condemned position as a positive statement. Revelation was completed with the death of the last apostle. But in more recent years, some theologians are stepping back from that positive statement. If public revelation did not end with the death of the last apostle, is there a definite time, event, or condition which closed the era of revelation? You want me to continue? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, continue.
Okay. Could you walk us through the steps to show how revelation was completed with the death of the last apostle? It is not infallible teaching if that is the case?
Okay, so Patrick had a little slip of the tongue in saying that that many theologians have restated the condemned proposition as a positive statement. What they've actually done is restated the condemnation as a positive statement. So instead of saying this is wrong, they flip it around to say something true, which is revelation was completed with the death of the last apostle. Now, he says that some theologians are stepping back from that positive statement, and I'm not sure who he's thinking about or what alternative position they would be advocating. I can see two different possibilities. If you step away from the positive statement that revelation was completed with the death of the last apostle, then that could mean either that revelation continued, binding public revelation continued after the death of the last apostle, and I'm not sure who would say that, or it could mean that revelation ended even before the death of the last apostle. And well, I would assume that's true because I assume whoever the last apostle was, he wasn't giving new revelation on his deathbed, and his final spoken sentence was before his death was an item of public revelation. I would assume that all of the revelation had been given some time before the last apostle died. How long before, I don't know. In terms of, is there a definite time or event or condition which closed the era of public revelation? Well, it's the death of the last apostle. It's the passing of the apostolic age, which ends with the death of the last apostle. His final question seems to be, is this an infallible teaching? And on that subject, I would have to say, it's not infallible so far as I know in terms of a statement by a pope or a magisterial council. I'm unaware of a pope or a magisterial council having issued an infallible teaching on this point. However, that doesn't mean it couldn't be infallible by what's known as the ordinary and universal magisterium of the church, which is the just collective teaching of the bishops in union with the Pope. And if they, at any point in time, agree that the faithful must definitively hold that something is true, then even though they're not gathered in an ecumenical council, that teaching becomes infallible. And I think there would be at least an argument that the bishops have definitively taught that there are no new revelations following the apostolic age. And the trick is it can be really hard to document that bishops have taught something definitively without them being in a council. So those are usually arguable, but I think there's at least a case there that you could argue that.
Both Michael and Patrick, thank you for those very interesting questions. There's the music, so we got to take a quick break. It's an internet open forum today. Jimmy Akin is our guest. Lots more great questions from the internet coming up right after this on Catholic Answers Live. When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heschmeyer explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore.
Our Lord needs articulate defenders of the truth to spread the joy of the Catholic faith. Catholic Answers monthly giving club, Society 315, helps you fulfill the call in 1 Peter 3:15 to always be prepared to make a defense for the hope that is in you. For as little as $10 a month, you'll help Catholics grow in faith, bring lapsed Catholics home, and lead non-Catholics to the truth. Go to casociety315.com and join today.
Is relativism dead? It sure seems dead. Each day, new moral demands are made, and they are presented to us as absolutes. Everything, from transgender ideology to physician-assisted suicide, is presented as a moral good that all right-thinking people must accept. But Catholic Answers' own Carlo Broussard says look deeper, and you will see today's moralism is just relativism dressed up in new clothes. Carlo's eye-opening book, The New Relativism, shines a light on how the sacred moral teachings of this age cover up a deep denial of moral truth. Order your copy of The New Relativism today at shop.catholic.com and be prepared to defend the truth against aggressive relativism. The New Relativism at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Hi, this is Janet Williams. We embrace the essence of feminine spirituality on Women of Grace tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern here on EWTN Radio. Now, back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. It's an internet open forum. Jimmy Akin is our guest. We got lots of great questions that have come to us via the internet, via its various modes. If you ever want to submit a question, you can always just send an email to radio@catholic.com. Some of these questions come from other sources, like Jimmy's Facebook conversations with people and all that. But an easy way to do it, if you're like, I want to get in on that internet open forum, just send it to radio@catholic.com. The next question comes from Jason. Jason asks, could the intro to the Gospel of John be discussing the pre-incarnate Christ? I've heard this as an opinion held by some. Note that the verses talk about Jesus coming into his own before, in verses 10 through 13, before announcing he became flesh in verse 14. Is this a plausible interpretation? Did any of the fathers hold it?
I'm not aware of any of the fathers holding it. Now, I should mention that Jason clarified in a separate email to me, and I kind of figured this was what he was talking about, but he clarified and mentioned how God sometimes seems to appear in human form in the Old Testament. And these passages are sometimes referred to as involving the second Yahweh or the little Yahweh, because there was some awareness at this period in Judaism that there was some kind of plurality in the Godhead. They didn't have the full doctrine of the Trinity, and they certainly didn't understand it as clearly as we do, but they did understand that there's Yahweh and he's God, but then there's these other passages in the Old Testament where God seems to show up in human form, and sometimes he's described as an angel, which just means a messenger. And sometimes you got this messenger there, and then the messenger is sometimes spoken of as if it's a different person than Yahweh, and then sometimes it's spoken of as if it's Yahweh. A famous example of that is at the sacrifice of Isaac. The angel shows up to say, "Whoa, Abraham, don't be so quick," and then and we're told it's the angel of Yahweh, and then it's spoken of as if it is Yahweh. And so this led to what has since been called the two powers in heaven doctrine, that there's more than one divine being in heaven. Or more than one divine person in heaven, I should say. And you have passages that Jason was thinking of, like where you got the boy Samuel, and he's hearing God's voice as a little boy, and it'll say, "And God came and stood." And there have been people who have, including among the church fathers, who have said these angel of the Lord passages and passages like this, these are the pre-incarnate Christ. So that's a definite opinion that's out there that has traction in Christian history. The question is that the case for the prologue of John's Gospel, which is essentially the first 18 verses of John's Gospel? Well, I think the answer there is no. And I've noted for a long time, even without considering this particular question, that John often writes when he's giving his historical narrative in the course of the Gospel of John, he's very linear. He's very concerned about chronology. But when John is not writing chronological narrative, he gets loopy in the sense of he loops through concepts. He's not proceeding in a linear chronological way. You see that, for example, in his letters, particularly in 1 John, which is a big one. And in 1 John, he's talking through ideas, and if you watch him, he's kind of like Pope John Paul II. He cycles through ideas, and they keep coming back, and you proceed in a cyclical way rather than straight through a set of topics without repetition. And so that's just John's style when he's writing something other than history. Well, the prologue of his gospel is not part of the historical narrative. It contains references to history, but it also it's written in a more meditative, cyclical style rather than a strict chronology. And we can see that by reading it. So the first question was, at least the most general question is, does it involve the pre-incarnate Christ? And the answer there is yeah, because the very first verses do. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. So that's all pre-incarnate Christ, but it's not about the pre-incarnate Christ taking on human form prior to the incarnation. The next verse says, "There was a man sent from God whose name was John." Okay, so now we're not at the beginning of the world anymore. We're at John the Baptist. Because that's who he's talking about. He came for testimony, to bear witness to the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to bear witness to the light. The true light that enlightens every man was coming into the world. Okay, now he's backed up again, because Jesus came into the world at his birth. And so you can see how we're moving. We're at the beginning of the world, and we're at John the Baptist. Now we're back at Jesus's birth. He was in the world, and the world was made through him. Now we're back at the beginning of creation again. Yet the world knew him not. He came to his own, or to his own home, and his own people received him not. Okay, well, that doesn't really describe what happened in these second Yahweh situations in the Old Testament. They did receive him. Samuel received him. Abraham received him. They honored him. So we don't have the Jewish people collectively rejecting the second Yahweh prior to the time of Christ. So that would seem to be talking, verse 11 would seem to be talking about the ministry of Jesus. But to all who received him, he believed in his name. He gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of a man, but of God. And the Word became flesh. So now we're back at the incarnation of Christ again, and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth. We have beheld his glory, glory as of the only begotten Son of the Father. So that's the first 14 verses, and you can see we're jumping all over the place in terms of when we're talking about. John has this cyclical, meditative style of writing when he's not doing straight historical narrative. And so I think, if you look at the fact that John the Baptist gets mentioned before he starts discussing the incarnation, and before the verses that Jason cited, I think it's clear that that's the frame of reference we're talking about. He's not really talking about stuff that happened in the Old Testament after the creation. He's talking about the creation and kind of general things that apply to everybody, like every man gets this light, but then he's specifically talking about the incarnation of Christ and the appearance of John the Baptist.
Thank you very, very much, Jason, for that question. On we go. This one comes from Jeremy, and it is pithy. Jeremy asks, the book of Jonah, history or parable?
Well, there's some evidence for both. And scholarly opinion is quite divided on this subject. Many scholars, particularly in the last century or so, including quite conservative ones, have concluded that the book of Jonah is sort of a parable. And there are other books that in the Bible, like Tobit and Judith, that are very clearly parables. With Jonah, though, it's not quite so easy. Now, one thing we should note, Jonah is not written in the first person. So this is not a book like Isaiah, where the prophet is saying, I did this, and then I did this. It's all third person in Jonah. Jonah did this, then Jonah did that, and then he did this. And so it presents itself as if it's being written by someone other than Jonah. If it was first person narrative, it would be less likely to be a parable. But since it is third-person narrative, there's more of a possibility of it being a parable. People will also point to the big fish that swallows Jonah as evidence that this is a parable. But I don't find that really persuasive, because there are cases where people have been swallowed by whales and live to tell the tale. Call me Ishmael. Although actually the big whale in that... it doesn't end well for Captain Ahab, I'll put it that way.
You're giving it away. Oh, man. And that book just came out in the 1800s, and you're giving it away.
In general terms only.
All right.
I don't mention what
Ahab
does with his arm at the end, for example. So I don't think that's decisive. And then we have the fact that we have independent attestation to the existence of Jonah. If you look in 2 Kings 14:25, which is a historical book, it mentions the historical existence of the prophet Jonah, who's the son of this particular guy, and it's the same name. So we have independent attestation that Jonah was a real individual. Now, there are clear theological lessons that are being taught in Jonah through the prophet's experiences. So I think it's fair to say that it is a clearly didactic book. It's meant to teach you lessons by example. But I think it's also ancient, so it's not history in the modern sense. But I don't think we can safely say that it's simply a parable. I think you can safely say that about Tobit and Judith, And I respect people who would say it about Jonah, but I think that we can't say it confidently. So I think there's evidence for this. You can argue it's a parable. You can also argue it's history. You could argue it's something in the middle, that it's a didactic narrative that is based on historical events, but that we might not want to take every element of it literally. So I would kind of put it, failing decisive proof one way or another, I would tend to say, well, it could be either, and it could be this middle thing. A story that is based on historical events, but also contains notable didactic elements or teaching elements that may mean not everything in it is to be taken strictly literally.
Jeremy, thank you very much for that question. That brings us to the break. We'll take a quick break, be right back with more Internet Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on, we'll be right back with more Catholic Answers Live.
The Catechism defines evangelization as the proclamation of Christ and His gospel by word and the testimony of life. But what does that look like in real life? It looks like St. Paul street evangelists out in the public square sharing the good news. We're a Catholic nonprofit that starts conversations by handing out free sacramentals. Then we employ our method of listen, befriend, proclaim, and invite. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to learn more.
Carry the faith wherever you go. Catch up with the latest news from Washington, D.C., the Vatican, and the world on all of our EWTN news platforms, including EWTN News Nightly, the National Catholic Register, and the world over. Download the EWTN app at EWTNapps.com today.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Hey, more than 400,000 copies are in print of Trent Horn's book, Why We're Catholic. And it's got 1,600 five-star reviews over at Amazon. And it's on sale right now over at shop.catholic.com. So you can get it an individual copy. You can get it in bulk. Check it out right now, today, at shop.catholic.com. Jimmy Akin, our guest, and it's an Internet Open Forum. And let's see, where are we? We got, I think Bo is next. Bo asks this. When Jesus performed various miracles in the Gospels, why did he tell the recipients not to tell anyone what he had done? Why did he want his miraculous deeds to be kept secret?
Well, the first thing to say is Jesus did this on some occasions, but he didn't do it on all occasions. And one of the things that you discover if you do a careful study of this is when he told people to keep quiet about it, he was in Jewish territory. But when he was in Gentile territory, he would do the opposite. So, for example, when he goes in across the Sea of Galilee into Gentile territory and he encounters the Gadarene demoniac, okay, this guy's a Gadarene. He's not a Jew. And so Jesus is in Gentile territory, which is why they're keeping the pigs there, because they're not Gentiles. They're not Jews. They're not under the pork restriction. And so when he exorcises the Gadarene demoniac, he tells him, go and tell people what God has done for you. And it's only when he's in Jewish territory that he says to keep it on the down low. So why would that be? What would explain that difference? Well, it would presumably have to do with the different reactions that Jews and Gentiles will have to Jesus doing divine miracles. What are Gentiles going to do? Well, Gentiles, some of them may worship the God of the Jews, but not exclusively, usually. And so if you're told to go tell people about it, you're being told to go tell what the God of the Jews, the true God, did for you. So this is going to be a form of evangelization, and that's how it'll be taken in Gentile territory. But now let's suppose Jesus did the same thing in Jewish territory, where every time he healed someone, he said, go tell everybody about this. He would be mobbed. In fact, we read about him being mobbed, for example, in Capernaum, where after he exorcises another demoniac in the synagogue in Capernaum, which I've actually been to. You can go to this synagogue today, I mean, the ruins of it, but it's pretty impressive. And then he goes over to Peter's house, and you can also go to Peter's house in Capernaum. I've been there too. And it says that, and he heals Peter's mother-in-law, and then it talks about how people started bringing all kinds of sick people and demoniacs and the paralyzed guy. They started bringing all these people to Jesus, and it mentions they couldn't even eat a meal because they were being mobbed. And Jesus didn't want to be mobbed all the time. It would prevent him from being able to travel around and conduct his itinerant ministry. And he even tells the disciples in various places, let's get out of here. Let's go be alone for a while. And the people still follow him. And that's without him encouraging this behavior. So if he had told everybody, go publicize what I've just done for you, it would have just made the problem all the more worse, because Jewish people are going to have a very different reaction. They're going to mob him and impede his ministry. And they're going to try to do something else. They're going to try to make him king, because they perceive him as this miracle-working Messiah who's going to kick out the Romans and be our new king. And in fact, John's gospel talks about how at one point, Jesus was confronted with this crowd and he had to leave because he realized that they were going to compel him to be king if he didn't. And he didn't want to be a political king. That's not his mission. My kingdom is not of this world. So in order to keep from being mobbed and to keep people from trying to force him into a political role as Messiah, he told a lot of the people he helped. He wanted to help them, and he did help them, but he wanted them to keep it on the down low in Jewish circles because of what his role as Messiah would mean for them. But when he was outside of Jewish circles in Gentile territory, he wanted to promote knowledge and belief in the true God, the God of the Jews. And so he would tell them, go announce this, tell people what God has done for you.
That's a fascinating distinction. And I don't know that I've ever heard anyone make it so clearly before. Bo, I'm very grateful for that question. Thank you very, very much. We continue with Internet Open Forum. This question comes from Bobby. Could God create a rock too heavy for him to lift?
No. This question comes up a lot, and it has been recognized for centuries that the answer to this is no. For example, Thomas Aquinas explains that God can do he's omnipotent, he can do anything as long as it doesn't involve a logical contradiction. A logical contradiction is where the terms themselves conflict so that they don't have any actual meaning. They may sound like they do, but if you think about it, they don't. Like if I say a four-sided triangle, okay, that's not a real shape. Triangles, by definition, have three angles and three sides. If they don't, it's not a triangle. Therefore, four-sided triangle is a meaningless string of words. It doesn't correspond to any possible entity. So God can't make four-sided triangles. Well, what about a stone too heavy for him to lift? Well, if he's got omnipotence, then he has infinite lifting power. And a stone that couldn't be lifted by a being with infinite lifting power would have to have more than infinite mass. And that is another logical contradiction. You can't have something that's more than infinite. You might have different levels of infinity, but it would have to be, but God's got all of them in terms of lifting power. So it'd have to be beyond any concept of infinity, and there is nothing beyond the concept of infinity. That's another meaningless concept. So the idea of a stone too heavy for an omnipotent being to lift is logical nonsense. It's not a real entity, not a possible entity, and therefore, like a four-sided triangle, it's something God can't make. Incidentally, got a funny little personal story. Back when I was in grad school in philosophy, this question came up.
Yeah.
And I was being a little facetious, and I said, no, God could not create a rock too heavy for him to lift, because any object that massive would collapse under its own weight and become a black hole. And my professor in that class and thus ceased to be a rock. And my professor in that class, who I just recently got together for lunch with, said, "Congratulations, you've just answered the question while dodging the issue. Welcome to academia."
What a great response. But then you moved out into popular apologetics, probably because you didn't want to avoid the issue. Bobby, thanks.
I was being facetious even then.
Yeah. Bobby, thank you very, very much for the question. Rex wants to ask another question about a rock. When the stone was rolled back from the tomb, what became of the cord and seal?
Okay, so there's no mention of a cord in the Gospels. You may have encountered some presentations of this story that involved a cord, but there's not one mentioned in the Gospel. So I would say we don't have evidence that there was a cord, therefore nothing happened to it. What we actually read, now there is, in some translations, there is a verse that could suggest a seal was used. For example, if you read Matthew 27:66, in some translations it will say, "So they went and made the tomb secure by sealing the stone and setting a guard." Okay, so that could sound like they sealed the stone. They must have put a seal on it. Yeah, not necessarily. The word that's used in Greek for sealing the stone here is sphragizo. And sphragizo can mean to provide with a seal. So it can mean you put a seal on something, but it also means to close tightly. So it has two different meanings. You could interpret Matthew 27:66 as meaning that they rolled the stone in front of it, they put a seal on the stone, and then they established they set a guard over it. Or it could just mean they made the tomb secure by closing the stone tightly and setting a guard. And we have a parallel expression in English. We'll talk about sealing an envelope, and we don't literally mean put a seal on the envelope.
Right.
That's where the expression came from. But today, seal an envelope just means close it securely. And that's what happened with the verb sphragizo in Greek. It came to just mean, even though it originally meant to provide with a seal, it came to mean to just close securely or close tightly. So I don't think we have good evidence that there was a seal. And so I think they just rolled the stone into place. There's no other mention of a literal seal in any of the other Gospels. The women, for example, when they come, they're not saying to themselves, "Ooh, who's going to take off the seal?" They just say, "Who's going to roll the stone away?" And so it sounds to me like the stone was just rolled into place and secured in that way, but not that there was literally a seal put on it. So I would say I don't think we have good evidence for either a cord or a seal in the case of the tomb. And so I don't think anything happened to them. I think they just rolled back the stone. I think the angels just rolled back the stone.
Ah, gotcha. Yeah, right. Yeah, that sealing the envelope thing is a good that makes it clear how that could be. So if when they put Jesus in the tomb, just out of curiosity, Jimmy, was that meant to be his permanent resting place? I mean, I know that he rose from the dead, but I mean the intention of the people, was that meant to be his permanent resting place?
Well, possibly.
Okay.
So it's because of the way Jewish burial practices worked. What they would do is they would put your dead body in a tomb on kind of a ledge, and it would deteriorate, because to dust you shall return. And so after a year or so, they'd come back, and all your flesh would have rotted away, but your bones would be there. And they'd take your bones and clean the bones.
Okay.
And then put them in a box known as an ossuary or bone box. And if you were a member of the family, they'd just put you back, the bone box, in the same family tomb. But in this case, since Jesus was a member of a different family and this was an emergency burial, they might have been envisioning giving the bone box or the bones back to his original family.
Yeah, gotcha. Jimmy Akin is our guest. It's an open forum, but it's an internet open forum, and we got all kinds of wonderful questions still to come in the second hour. Jimmy will be back with us, and we will continue with Internet Open Forum right after this on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. It's an open forum. Jimmy Akin, our guest. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. And it's an internet open forum. We've got tons and tons of questions that have been submitted. Well, we get tons and tons of questions submitted via the internet, and we gather up a whole bunch of the best ones, and we ask them of Jimmy Akin. Jimmy, of course, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers and the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Jimmy, welcome back.
Oh, happy to be back.
Well, thanks for doing it. I really have enjoyed the questions so far, and I have to be honest with you. I looked ahead a little bit, so I'm looking forward to some.
You?
Yes, I did.
Do you also read the end of mystery novels before you work your way to that?
I actually do have a tendency to at certain points in some of them. Yes, I have done that. That's not been unheard of in my reading career. I don't know why I get antsy at a certain point. It's usually not at the beginning, but at some point, like a third of the way through, I'm like, I wonder how this all works out.
I have sort of the opposite tendency. When I read fiction or watch movies or TV shows, I'm extremely plot focused. And I predict what's going to happen. And I usually have a really good sense for most of what I'm watching. I have a really good sense of where this is heading. I'm rarely completely surprised. Occasionally, there will be an episode or a movie that has a last-minute twist right at the end that I'm not expecting, and I love that.
Yeah.
What I love even more is there are occasional things where there's a standard setup, and then there is a mid-story twist.
Yes.
And that I'm not expecting, and it keeps twisting. And in the second half of the story, the standard pretty much the opening pretty much has to be standard. Otherwise, there's no basis for a twist. But then there's a mid-story twist, and the twists keep coming. And I realize I have no idea where this is going. And that, to me, is the most exciting, thrilling stuff where I can't predict what's coming. And I want that to go on for as long as possible. So on those rare occasions when I can't predict what's going to happen, I want that sense of uncertainty to last. It happened.
Yeah.
The last time it happened just recently, but before that, the last time it happened was watching the 2014 movie Gone Girl, where there is a mid-story twist, and it becomes unpredictable at that point. But just recently, I was rewatching The Postman Always Rings Twice, the 1946 film. And I'd seen it years ago, but I'd almost completely forgotten it. And we get to the middle of the story, and there's a twist, and the twists just keep coming. And I just loved it because I couldn't predict where this is going to go.
Oh, I know exactly. And you know what? As you were saying that, I was thinking that it's when I'm not really enjoying the book that much that I go to the end. It's if it's got me, I won't do that because there's the pleasure of it, the joy of, oh no, I don't want to mess this up. I want to let this play out. Yeah. All right. Well,
Death Trap is another one that's like that. The movie Death Trap with Michael Caine and Christopher Reeve, that also has a mid-story twist that severely complicates things.
Death Trap. I haven't seen that. All right. I'll watch for that. I had the very bad experience of going to see The Sting in the movie theater with a guy who had already seen it. And just before the movie starts, he tells me the end. I was like, "What are you doing? What are you What are you doing?" I think I was like 13 years old, but still,
that's one with an end of story twist.
Yeah,
and the end of story twist is fine, but you don't have that uncertainty through most of it.
Yeah, right. All right, Bobby's got a question for you, Jimmy. Bobby writes, when Jesus sent out the 72 disciples in pairs of 2, what was the gospel that they preached? Jesus hadn't yet suffered, died, risen, or ascended, and he hadn't even proclaimed the fullness of his teachings yet, nor had he instituted the Eucharist or sent the Holy Spirit. So what was their good news?
Yeah, so this is a question that a lot of Christians have, because for us, the story of Jesus is so central to our faith that we tend to identify it with the good news. And so it's like, what would the good news be except for Jesus's death on the cross and all the stuff he instituted the Eucharist and he sent the Holy Spirit? What would it be if it's not that? Well, actually, it's not that, not in its primary understanding in a Jewish context. It implies all of that because that's how the good news was fulfilled. But the good news itself is right there at the beginning of the Synoptic Gospels. It's what John the Baptist is preaching. And you'll notice that when Jesus begins his preaching ministry, the evangelists say, and this is what he preached, and it's the same thing that John the Baptist was preaching. So properly speaking, in its primary conceptualization, the good news is that God's kingdom is coming, and that God's kingdom is going to triumph over the kingdoms of darkness and the nations of the world, and they're all going to become gods. It's like in the book of Revelation, it's announced the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, which is also in the Hallelujah chorus. It's one of the best parts. And, or I should say in Handel's Messiah, and it's one of the best parts of the Messiah. But I'll refrain from singing it now. But we have the same thing in the Gospels, where it's not just the good news or the gospel of God's kingdom, but specifically God's Son has a role in that kingdom. And so the good news is and John the Baptist talks about this. He talks about this one who's coming after me, who's going to be greater than me. That's part of John the Baptist's message too. So God's kingdom, the emergence of God's kingdom was to be accompanied and implemented by the coming of the Messiah, of God's Son. And so, because he's the human king of God's kingdom. And so that's the basic gospel message. God is not leaving us alone. He's bringing his kingdom into the world that incorporates the Messiah as king. And what they didn't realize was it was going to involve the Messiah suffering and dying and sending the Holy Spirit and all that. They didn't have a clear understanding of that. But the basic good news that John the Baptist preached, and that Jesus preached, and that Jesus taught to the disciples, including the 72, on their preaching mission, was the imminent arrival of God's kingdom, including the Messianic King.
Thank you for that question, Bobby. Great question. I think we've got time for another one before we have to take the break, so I will go to Brad's question. Brad wants to know this, Jimmy. Why does God permit the damnation of souls that he created?
Well, there are several ways of answering this. Fundamentally, because he gave them free will. He wants people to love him, and to love others. Love is God's highest priority. The two great commandments are love God and love your neighbor. So that's clearly God's highest priority. But he doesn't want to just program people to behave lovingly. He wants love to be freely chosen. And that means giving them free will. And so if a person misuses their free will to become unloving, to not love God and not love neighbor, then God won't force them to do so, and he won't force them into union with him, which is what salvation is. What damnation is self-chosen alienation from God. And so he'll let people have their choice on that. Now, there are other related questions you could ask, like why would God create someone with foreknowledge that they're going to choose to misuse their free will? That's a separate question, and I've answered it multiple times. So I won't go into it here since you said we're getting close to a break, but if you Google Jimmy Akin, why would God create a soul knowing it's going to be damned, you'll get at jimmyakin.com, you'll get an explanation of the different possible ways of understanding that.
Thank you very much, Brad, for the question. We will take that break. Be right back with more Internet Open Forum with Jimmy Akin right after this.
Stay with us for more Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features daily Mass, prayers, articles, and meditations in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church. On the web at magnificat.com.
Turn to Mary, the Mother of God, for help bearing witness to the gift of life with the National Life Rosary. Designed exclusively for EWTN, the unique centerpiece and crucifix represent the reality that all life is sacred and begins at conception. Help build a culture of life with the National Life Rosary, available now at EWTNRC.com. EWTN is the global Catholic network.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin is our guest this hour, and it's an open forum. It's an internet open forum. And this one's about the Donner Party. And you never know what you're going to get with the Donner Party question. Did the Donner Party commit unrepentant mortal sin? That's from Rob.
Okay, so for those who may not be aware, we should explain who the Donner Party were. Basically, they were a group of migrants who were on their way to California in the late 1800s. And so they were led by a guy named Donner, so they were called the Donner Party. And as they're crossing the American West in 1896, they get stuck in Nevada because winter hits. And so they're stuck in Nevada for the winter of 1896, end of 1896, beginning of 1897. And conditions were so hard while they were there that some of them died. And they also didn't have food. And so they resorted to cannibalism. And, okay, so is cannibalism a mortal sin? Well, the church teaches that we need to treat the bodies of the dead respectfully, but that doesn't mean any one particular mode of treatment. That's why you can, for example, bury people in the ground, or you can cremate them respectfully, or you can do other things. And so respect can be shown in different ways. Could you respectfully cannibalize someone? Well, surprisingly, the answer is yes, because surprisingly to a lot of Americans, but not to people living in other cultures where they actually practice cannibalism. It is common in some cultures to cannibalize your loved ones as a sign of respect, because you want to emulate them. You want to take their good qualities into yourself. Like let's say they were very brave or very wise or something like that. Well, you cannibalize your loved one. You make human soup and you drink it and so forth. So that's actually anthropologically respectful cannibalism is a thing. It has been documented. Now, were the Donner Party being respectful? Well, not in that way. Presumably they didn't have these other cultural beliefs about respectful cannibalism, but that wouldn't stop them from being respectful of their friends, their loved ones, their traveling companions who, okay, in order to survive, what would this person want me to do? Would they want me to, they're not using their body now, it's just going to decay, which means it's going to get eaten by microbes, because that's what decay is. Should I just let the microbes eat it, or should I eat it myself so that I can survive? And a lot of people could say, I think they would want me to survive. As distasteful as the thought of cannibalism is to someone in our culture, I don't think it's automatically a grave sin. So we wouldn't have grounds for accusing the Donner Party of unrepentant mortal sin just because they committed cannibalism. What about other grounds? Well, they killed 2 Native American guides so they could eat them.
Oh, they did?
Yeah.
Oh, I missed that part of the story.
That's murder. And it's, I love plot twists.
As you mentioned before.
Yeah. So that's murder. And so they committed murder. They didn't just wait in all cases for people to die and then cannibalize them after their death. They killed people in order to cannibalize them. And so, and notice there's a racist element here, because they only did it to the Native American guides. Not to the other members of the party. And so we've got racist murder going on here. And that is grave matter.
Mm-hmm.
But in order for something to be an unrepentant mortal sin, you need more than grave matter. You need not to repent to make it unrepentant, but you also need, in addition to it having grave matter, you need to have full knowledge and deliberate consent. Well, I think that they probably had full knowledge that you shouldn't murder people. And that would mean that if they didn't commit mortal sin, it would have to be on grounds of lack of full consent. So would there be a case that they lacked full consent? Well, if you're starving, then you've at least got a severe psychophysiological compulsion. You have this extreme hunger, you're in danger of death, and that can mess with your head. So I think it's arguable that when they committed murder, they did so under an extreme form of compulsion that may have deprived them of the kind of deliberate consent because they were just so desperate. That would be needed for a mortal sin. So I think it's arguable that they committed a grave sin by murdering these people, but it may not have qualified as a mortal sin due to the desperation they had, providing them with such a severe compulsion they lacked full, deliberate, normal, rational consent. However, I only think that's arguable. I don't think that's certain. I think you could also argue, now I don't know the details of the situation, but I can envision someone being really hungry and desperate and yet still knowing and having sufficient deliberation to say, I'm not going to kill this person in order to eat them. And so I think it's arguable that it is a mortal sin in their cases, and I think it's arguable that it's not. And this ultimately goes to what we always point out, which is we can't judge someone else's heart. I don't know the state of their heart. God does, but I don't. So assuming they did have sufficient deliberation to commit a mortal sin when they killed these two people, was it unrepentant? That I don't know.
Yeah.
The ones who survived, they didn't all die that winter. So at least I don't believe they all did. And even if they did all die that winter, they may have repented before they died. So and as they say, between the bootstrap and the ground, pardon sought is pardon found. So if you're in a desperate situation and you appeal to God for his mercy, you can have some confidence in receiving it. So I can't say that they committed unrepentant mortal sin. What I can say is they did commit grave sin and racist grave sin when they murdered two of their Native American guides in order to eat them.
I didn't like that twist at all. I don't like that at all. Thanks, Rob, for the question. I said at the beginning, you never know what you're going to get when you get a Donner Party question, and I didn't see that racist murder coming, but I'm not going to forget it. Joe wants to know this, Jimmy. Is there a word in English? Oh, this is a perfect Jimmy Akin question. Is there a word in English that rhymes with orange?
Yeah, I know of at least two. Now, orange is proverbially a word that there aren't any rhymes for in English, but actually there are. They're just not that well known. One of them is sporange. A sporange, spelled S-P-O-R-A-N-G-E, is a kind of a spore sac. It's a little sac that plants make and house their spores in, or that fungi house their spores in. Another is blorange, and this is a real word, B-L-O-R-E-N-G-E.
It does sound like just a pretend word.
Yeah, but it's not. Blorange is a mountain in Wales, so there's a Mount Blorange.
All right.
So there you go. Sporange and blorange both rhyme with orange.
Blorange sounds like if you asked a 3-year-old, what rhymes with orange? That sounds like the answer you would get to that question. All right, there you go, Joe. You got your answer. This one comes from Joseph, and Joseph wants to know this. Who is Joseph in this prayer? Lord God, who left us the signs of your passion on the holy shroud, in which your most holy body was wrapped when you were lowered from the cross by Joseph, grant us, most loving Lord, that by your holy death and burial, and by the sorrows and sufferings of your holy Mother Mary, Our Lady, that the souls in purgatory may be brought to the glory of the resurrection, where you live and reign with God the Father in the unity of the Holy Spirit, God forever and ever. Amen.
So the Joseph that's most famous in the New Testament is Joseph, the father of Jesus, his adoptive father. And so what this prayer refers to is Joseph, who is someone named Joseph, who lowers the body of Jesus from the cross. Well, that's not his dad.
No.
That's not Joseph of Nazareth, because he apparently is dead at this point. He is present in the infancy narratives in Matthew and Luke, and he's present as late as when Jesus is 12 years old, when he's found in the temple in Luke. But he's never present during the ministry of Jesus, and that suggests he was dead. That seems to be confirmed by the fact that in John 19 at the crucifixion, Jesus entrusts his mother to the care of the beloved disciple. And that wouldn't make any sense if Joseph were still alive. She'd just go back home and be with Joseph and, other family members. So all that suggests Joseph is dead by the time of Jesus's adult ministry. And since the crucifixion occurs at the end of the adult ministry, that means Joseph of Nazareth wouldn't be around in order to take Jesus's body down from the cross. But there's another Joseph who is. Joseph of Arimathea. He was a member of the Jewish ruling council, the Sanhedrin. He was secretly a Christian, and he is reported in all 4 of the Gospels to have buried Jesus. So he requested permission from Pilate to take the body. He received permission, and then he buried Jesus in his own tomb, because that was the one that was available. And it was just about to be sundown on Friday, which means the Sabbath was about to begin. So they didn't have time to arrange anything else. So he just did bury Jesus in his own tomb on an emergency basis. And so that's who this prayer is referring to. It's Joseph of Arimathea. And if you want to read more about him, you can look at the end of all 4 of the Gospels, and it'll talk about him.
Thanks, Joseph. Thanks very much for the question. On we go. Let's do Karen's question. Karen wants to know, how do you tell if something is the will of God versus the will of another human being imposed upon you?
Well, it's going to depend in part on the relationship you have with that person. I mean, do they have any legitimate authority over you? For example, are they your superior in a religious order? And you're bound to them in obedience? Or are they your parent and you're a minor child, so you're bound to them in obedience under natural law? Or are they your boss, so that you're contractually bound to them in obedience? Well, if you are bound to someone in obedience and they tell you to do something that's within their scope of authority, then under ordinary circumstances, it's going to be God's will for you to do that. They may be making a mistake. They may be telling you to do something that's not the best thing, but as long as it's not sinful, then, or severely damaging in some way, then ordinarily it's going to be God's will for you to do what they tell you. Conditional on them having actual authority over you and them operating within the limits of their authority. On the other hand, what if they don't have authority over you? Well, someone can tell you it's God's will that you must do this, and that's their opinion, but that doesn't make it God's will, because they don't have authority over you. So you can listen to their arguments as to why they think it's God's will and decide if they're good arguments or not. That involves using critical thinking. But there's no magic test for discerning is something definitely God's will if God hasn't told us? Some things are obviously God's will because he's told us, thou shalt not commit adultery. So committing adultery, that's not God's will. Not committing adultery, that is God's will. But in other cases where God hasn't given us a specific directive, it's a matter of opinion, and that gets sorted out by things like applying principles from moral theology, using critical thinking, and even experimenting with a situation and seeing, well, does this work or not? Is God blessing my efforts along these lines? But if someone doesn't have authority over you, or if they're not acting within the scope of their authority, then they may just be imposing their own thoughts on you, and you need to use critical thinking to evaluate their arguments.
Right back with more Internet Open Forum, Catholic Answers Live. Excitement is building for Catholic Answers Annual Apologetics Conference, I Believe in God. There's still time to join us September 21st through 24th in sunny San Diego as we welcome Scott Hahn and an all-star lineup of speakers, as well as your favorite Catholic Answers apologists. Join us for a conference that is sure to ignite, encourage, and inform your faith. Seats are still available, but they're going fast. Visit CatholicAnswersConference.com or call 888-291-8000.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
Want to get right to the core of Christ's saving message? Want a roadmap for living the life Christ calls you to? It's time to look again at the Beatitudes. In his new book, Heart of the Gospel, How the Beatitudes Show Us God's Plan for Happiness, Father Sebastian Walsh demonstrates compellingly how these 8 declarations make up the foundation, the essence, and the final goal of Jesus' teaching. Heart of the Gospel illuminates the scriptural passages from which we get the Beatitudes, explains the significance of their wording, their order, and their timing in Jesus' ministry. And it draws out edifying parallels and connections with salvation history and the lives of the saints. Most importantly, Father Walsh offers wise counsel from his own work as a priest and teacher to help you live the Beatitudes in your own life. Order your copy of Heart of the Gospel today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Hi, this is Janet Williams. We embrace the essence of feminine spirituality on Women of Grace tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern here on EWTN Radio. Now, back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Probably having more fun than is technically allowed on a Tuesday, but it's Internet Open Forum, and that's a lot of fun. Jimmy's here with us. Lots and lots of great questions. And this one comes from Karina. Is there a definitive theology concerning wealth? And if not, why not?
Okay, so I'm going to answer this question on a couple of levels. The first one is there a definitive theology? And the answer is no, because theology is never definitive.
Oh.
Theology is different than church teaching. Church teaching is doctrine, but theology is the attempt to understand God based on his revelation. And that's different than what the church authoritatively teaches. So classically, doctrine can be definitive. The church can infallibly proclaim something and say this is definitely true, and everyone is bound to believe this definitively. But that doesn't happen in theology. Theology is a matter of opinion. Now, what can happen is the magisterium may take something from theology and elevate it to the status of doctrine. It could take an idea, let's say, proposed by theologians, like maybe Thomas Aquinas or someone, and say, okay, now this is church teaching. And it could even say, and it's definitive. So it becomes an infallible church teaching. But as long as that hasn't happened, if it's still theology rather than doctrine, then it's not going to be definitive. It's going to be a matter of opinion. And so there's not a definitive theology concerning wealth or any other subject because theology is the realm of opinion. Is there a definitive doctrine concerning wealth? Well, there's certainly doctrine concerning wealth. The church has social teaching, and it points to private property being a legitimate means and often a preferable means of facilitating the proper use and exchange of resources or wealth. On the other hand, there are other teachings concerning the proper use of resources or wealth, like we need to make adequate care for the poor and the disadvantaged and people like that. There are just wage teachings. So there are a variety of different doctrines that concern wealth. There, so far as I know, other than thou shalt not steal, which itself has fuzzy boundaries because not all taking of property counts as stealing. I'm not aware of any that would be definitive. Some of them may be very highly authoritative. Others that are recently proposed are going to be much less authoritative, but I'm not aware of anything that's definitive. Now, not everybody uses the word definitive in the sense that I'm using it. So are there strong teachings regarding wealth? Yeah. Thou shalt not steal, and that's obviously a strong teaching. I think you can even argue that one could be definitive, although with an asterisk, because there are some situations that are not stealing that look like stealing. But I guess that's kind of a summary of the area. If you want what the church teaches, you want to on concerning wealth, you want to look at the social doctrine of the church. And a number of years ago, there was a volume that came out known as the Compendium of the Social Doctrine of the Church that you could check out there's going to be a range of different levels of authority in that. Generally speaking, the more recently something has been proposed, the less authority it has, and the longer it's been taught, the more authority it's going to have. And beyond that, if you want to have a kind of a more full-orbed articulation of a theology of wealth, that's going to be in the realm of opinion, but there are Catholic writers who have undertaken such things.
Karina, thank you.
But none of them are definitive.
Thanks very much for that, Karina. And it's an internet open forum. We got time for more questions before we have to go to a break. So we'll go to Mandy's question. Help me out with this elusive hold hands orans posture versus no change in posture during the Our Father for the laity. If both are allowed now, what would be the reason in favor of doing the hand hold orans posture?
Okay, so I should mention, now Mandy says if both are allowed now. I assume what she's referring to is a position paper that was announced by the National Conference of Catholic Bishops in the Philippines earlier this summer. And so that, to the extent it has any legal force, is going to apply to the Philippines. It's not going to apply to other countries because the Philippine bishops don't make decisions for other countries. Similarly, and there are other provisions in other countries. In Italy, for example, it does have an option for the laity assuming a particular posture with their hands during the Our Father, but that's Italy. That's what the rubrics say, not for the universal church, but for Italy. And there it's just an option. It's not required. So what about here in the United States? Well, the U.S. bishops have not made any provision regarding this. And so we're left with what universal law says, which is the law that applies to all of the Latin Rite, unless special provision has been made in particular locations. And in universal law, it doesn't refer to the faithful doing anything with their hands during the Our Father. It does refer to the priest assuming the orans position. Orans is a Latin All of a sudden I'm blanking on the grammatical term, not preposition.
I don't know.
Anyway, it's a verbal noun, and it means praying. And so participle, that's what I was going for. It's orans is a Latin participle that means praying. And so what you would have in the ancient Christian church, based on presumably Jewish practice, is people would stretch out their arms and pray. And we see them doing this, for example, in early Christian art, like in the catacombs. And so this is having your arms outstretched is the traditional Christian praying position. Having your arms outstretched and grabbing other people's hands, though, is not the orans position. That's a third position. Now, what the rubrics in the rite of Mass say is that during the Our Father, the priest is to stretch his hands out. He is to assume the orans position. And in recent times, some laity have been imitating that. And sometimes they also grab hands with each other, which is a third posture. And then sometimes at the concluding doxology of the Lord's Prayer, they lift their hands up, which is a fourth posture. And none of these postures are indicated for the laity. And so this has led to a dispute. Now, on the one hand, canon law says that that everyone is to observe the liturgical books faithfully without adding, deleting, or altering anything in them. And since these additional postures would be adding or altering something, because the laity are not told to do them, you could argue that the laity shouldn't be doing this, at least under universal law. Local individual locations can have particular law where it is permitted, like Italy I mentioned. So there's an argument for not doing these things. Also, you're imitating a posture that priests are directed to do. And one of the things that's also mentioned in the general instruction of the Roman Missal is that, or at least in various liturgical documents, is that the laity are not supposed to imitate the priest. So that's the argument against. Is there an argument for? Well, the way canon law works and the way other forms of law work, there can be what's known as an easement, which is where a law is not enforced strictly for some period of time, and just by practice, a given form of behavior or custom becomes accepted. And so, like, for example, if you constantly, let's say you buy a piece of property and for years you let your neighbor walk across your property to go to the store. Okay, after a certain amount of time, your neighbor can argue they've got an easement. You didn't enforce your no trespassing rights, and so now they have an easement that allows them to go to the store because you've tacitly accepted them doing this for so long. And so even in countries like America, well, this has been going on for a long time, and the U.S. bishops have not clamped down on it. So you could argue there's an easement here, and that would be a legitimate thing you could argue. I think that there's another perspective that needs to be taken into consideration here, and this has been articulated by the canonist Edward Peters. So if you Google orans position, or just Our Father and Edward Peters, you'll come up with this. But he points out something very interesting. Prior to the reign of Pius XII, the laity did not pray the Our Father. And so what happened was the priest prayed it on their behalf, and the altar server would say, like, the concluding line of it. But the congregation as a whole did not pray it. And so prior to the time of Pius XII, this was viewed as a priestly prayer. And so the priest was directed to do his standard prayer posture during it. He was directed to do the orans posture. But then Pius XII changed it by introducing an option for the people to say it as well. And then following the Second Vatican Council, it became expected for the congregation to say it as well. And so this is no longer a priestly prayer uniquely. It's not one of the presidential prayers that's unique to the priest. But we've got this artifact of him being told to do the priestly prayer posture during it. So Ed Peters' solution, which I think has some merit, is, well, if it's no longer a specifically priestly prayer, because he's not the only one doing it, then he shouldn't be assuming the priestly prayer posture. And so they ought to that's an artifact of the prior practice of when only he and an altar server said it. So what they ought to do is remove that artifact and not direct him to do anything other than what he would normally do at this point, which would be to have his hands joined, just like the congregation. And then the congregation would, and the priest would both be assuming the same posture. So that's one way you could resolve this issue. Another would be passing regulations that would make it clear what the laity are supposed to do with their hands at this point. But that's not the situation we're in. So I would say that because the bishops have not cracked down on this, the situation is legally ambiguous, and I wouldn't judge anybody for what they're doing. Just don't grab my hands, because germs, okay?
Mandy, if you find yourself next to Jimmy at Mass, you know what to do. Other than that, you're on your own.
I keep my hands to myself.
As do I. That's much more comfortable for me. I don't know why, but it never seems to bother anybody. I don't fuss about what they do. They don't fuss about what I do.
Oh, I've had at my elbow little fingers grabbing me on my elbow.
Yeah. Mandy, thanks very much for the question. That brings us to the break. So we'll take the break. Be right back with more Internet Open Forum with Jimmy Akin.
You're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
The World Over with Raymond Arroyo. Coverage as seen through a Catholic lens.
All people of faith and sincerity need to awaken to this and protect this fundamental right of religious liberty.
Expert analysis.
Does Revelation judge history, or does history judge Revelation?
Stories vital to people of faith.
It's part of our faith that comedy and tragedy naturally go hand in hand.
Delivered to your inbox every week. Sign up today. Go to EWTN.com/worldover.
This is Sister Lucia Trainer of the Franciscan Sisters of the Eucharist. Catholic radio is an apostolate that is immediate, interactive, effective, and worldwide. It stimulates listeners to follow the teachings of the Church, brings Scripture closer to us, helps those who wrestle with questions of conscience, and allows us to celebrate the joy of our faith every day.
The world needs EWTN Catholic Radio, now more than ever.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Having fun with Jimmy Akin with a whole bunch of questions from the internet. It's an internet open forum. Jimmy Akin, of course, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, where this week the topic will be, it'll be the second, did you say the second of two on reincarnation?
On modern reincarnation research. Last Friday, we looked at what modern reincarnation researchers have found, what the data is. And this week, we look at the theories that could explain that data. And I propose a new theory that I have not seen in the literature that does not actually involve reincarnation, but I think explains the data really well.
Remember when Shirley MacLaine was like the big popularizer of reincarnation?
Dude, you're dating yourself. That was the 80s.
Yeah, right. That was like 5 minutes ago. But yeah, the 80s. That's right. But Shirley MacLaine, famous for her, at the time anyways. Probably people, I wonder if people remember Shirley MacLaine. You really should. She was a fine dancer.
She's that lady from Madame Suzatska.
Is that a movie?
Yeah, she played a character named Madame Suzatska in a famous movie.
I missed that one. All right. Maybe people know her as the sister of Warren Beatty. I don't know. Matthew wants to know this. Matthew says, I would be interested in your thoughts on the late paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren, husband and wife, demonologists / clairvoyant trance medium allegedly employed by the Catholic Church on occasion. They remain part of the popular culture thanks to the Annabelle and The Conjuring films.
Okay, so I plan to do a future episode of Mysterious World on Ed and Lorraine Warren, but I have not dug into it and done the primary research yet, so I can only share limited thoughts at the present. Ed Warren was a self-professed demonologist, and his wife, Lorraine, was a clairvoyant trance medium, and they allegedly were involved in various exorcism cases by the Catholic Church. Whether that's true or not, I haven't yet established. What I can say is that there would be a good case for not using them if, Lorraine is doing trance mediumship. But not everybody who is working for the church knows the details of everybody's life. And so, they might not have known, or they might have been cutting corners, or they might have used them to a limited capacity, because there are experts who get used in connection with exorcism ministry, even though they're not priests and not exorcists, and sometimes not even Catholic. I know a non-Christian, in fact, who has an expertise in demonology, who has actually been called in to consult as a consultant on various cases based on his scholarly expertise. And I'm not going to say a lot about who it is because he hasn't publicly, out of concern for his privacy, but he has serious expertise on, on demonology and medieval writings on it from an academic perspective. And even though he's not a Christian, in respect of his academic expertise on this subject, he gets brought in to consult sometimes. And so I can imagine scenarios where, surprising as it might be, Ed and Lorraine Warren might have actually been called in to consult or something. And I don't know whether that happened. I don't know if they had permission of the bishop to do that, or if it was just something that happened without permission. That's all stuff I have to research in the future. What do I think about them as a couple? Well, my own impression is I'm not particularly impressed. And I can also say that among at least the parapsychologists I know, they don't have a particularly good reputation. They don't seem to have been careful in the research that they did. They seem to have an attraction for the sensationalistic and a lack of use of critical thinking, and just some bad results. Like they thought the Amityville Horror was real, and it wasn't. It was a hoax. I'm also going to have a future episode on the Amityville Horror where we talk about that. Also, they had this supposedly cursed doll called Annabelle, and there's no really good evidence that Annabelle is a cursed doll, but they built it up into a big thing. And so, my opinion of Ed and Lorraine Warren at present is not very high, but I will be doing research on them, and we'll see whether that research confirms or disconfirms my present fairly low opinion.
All right. Thank you very much for the question. That question came from Matthew. We appreciate that, Matthew. This one comes from Michelle. Michelle wants to know, how can we counter Protestants who name the same tired insults regarding the Blessed Virgin Mary as Mother of God, as well as the false claims that we worship her?
Well, we get this question a lot here at Catholic Answers, and so rather than go through it all in detail in the closing moments of the show, I'm going to recommend some resources. If you go to Catholic.com and type in Mother of God, and you may want to add the word Protestants to it, you'll get a bunch of resources for free online that will help you answer that. And one of the things you should point out is that actually this is not a distinctively Catholic belief. Protestant theologians, as opposed to some of the laity, but Protestant theologians tend to accept this. They recognize, okay, Jesus is God, Mary is Jesus's mother, therefore Mary can be described validly as the mother of God. That's simple transitivity. And even though there are some nuances that you have to understand, Mary is not older than God. Mary did not create God. She did have God in her womb, and therefore she is the mother of God in that sense. And this is widely recognized by Protestant theologians, including the reformers like Martin Luther and John Calvin. So you may have some pushback on this idea from some Protestant laity and even a few less educated pastors, but the more careful scholars, even in Protestantism, tend to support this. When it comes to the claims that we worship her, well, okay, I point out that we don't. We don't worship her in the sense of her being God. You, Michelle, as a Catholic, recognize that the Virgin Mary is a creature. So she's finite. She may be a very special, important, finite creature, but and we want to show her respect because Jesus said, well, the Ten Commandments say, honor your father and mother. And so Jesus certainly honored his mother. And if Jesus sets our example, we ought to honor his mother too. In fact, she says under divine inspiration in Luke chapter 1, behold, all generations are going to call me blessed. So that's what we're doing. We're acknowledging and celebrating the blessings that God gave Mary, but we're not claiming that she's a deity. And so just point out, I don't worship her as a deity. That's not what's going on here. And you can also type in Mary and worship at Catholic.com, and a bunch of resources will come up to help you for free.
Thanks, Michelle. Thank you very much for the question. This one comes from Mark. Why do Catholics all shake hands at the reenactment of the crucifixion of Jesus?
So at first I wasn't sure what Mark's question meant, because if I think about people reenacting the crucifixion of Jesus like at a passion play, there's no moment where everybody shakes hands.
Right.
There are 2 Sundays of the year in which the Passion narrative is read in a dramatic fashion. This is Palm Sunday or Passion Sunday, and then again on Good Friday, I guess. I misspoke and said Sundays. But you have a dramatic reading of it where you have the priest and the lector and the congregation taking different parts and reading them. But there's no moment in that where everybody's directed to shake hands. I finally thought, okay, maybe Mark's referring to the rite of peace, which is what it occurs in the Mass shortly before communion. And the purpose of the rite of peace, because Jesus says, be reconciled with your brother before you go to do your sacrifice. This is our sign of we're reconciling with each other. And in some places, at some times, that has taken the form of handshakes. That's not mandated. There's no specific mandated form that the rite of peace takes, other than saying to the priest saying, peace be with you, and everybody saying, and with your spirit. But the deacon or the priest can then call on people to exchange a sign of peace. And that can be anything. It can be a nod, it can be a bow, it can be a hug, it can be a wave. Personally, I use the Vulcan salute. People before COVID, tend to shake hands more or hug more. And they tend to especially still hug in families. I think shaking hands is less common post-COVID because germs, but it does happen. And when it happens, it's because we're signifying our reconciliation with each other as people prior to going to receiving our Lord in communion.
Mark, thank you very, very much for the question. I hope you'll stay in touch with us because it does seem that you have an interest in the Catholic Church. Jimmy, that was a very quick 2 hours for me. I know you did all the work, but that was very pleasant. Thanks for doing that with us.
My pleasure.
Check out Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World at mysterious.fm. That does it for us. We'll be back, God willing, next time. Catholic Answers Live.